My daughter just had her first conferences of the year, and it got me thinking maybe it's Minnesota Twins report card time. So get strapped in and get locked on Twins.
You are Locked On Twins, your daily Minnesota Twins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello again and welcome back to another edition of Locked On Twins. I'm your host, Brandon Warne. Been watching the Twins for 3 decades, covering them for about half that long, and I'm glad you're here. Glad you're making Locked On Twins your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And of course, as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we're your team every day. Love to hear from you if you are an everydayer. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And if you leave comments on YouTube, I'll do my best to engage with you. You also can check out my written work on the Access Twins newsletter. Before we get off and running today, we're going to talk about grading Twins hitters. Starting on the infield, we'll have a little series here and just kind of put a little tidy bow on what was a difficult 2025 season. First, though, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Again, that's FanDuel. Bet 5, get 300. So if you've got a good bet, that's a nice little tidy sum that you will get from there. So we are back with Locked On Twins. Going to grade a couple of catchers, couple of first basemen, if you could call them that, and just kind of roll through this. We'll see. I've budgeted enough time to do 4, or I've budgeted enough players to do 4 in this episode. Again, we'll see what there's time for, but very excited to get started. And we will do, just that with catcher Ryan Jeffers. Now, Jeffers slashed 266, 356, 397 in 464 plate appearances this season. That was a 1.2 WAR via Baseball Reference, flip that around, 2.1 on Fangraphs. I look at that slash line. It's a good gap between average and on base. You'd like to see a little more slug, but frankly, if you look at catchers, hitting catchers for that matter, he was 15th in catcher weighted runs created plus. He was tied for 15th with William Contreras. Now, Contreras was a plus 3.7 F-WAR player due to defense. And that's kind of where my hang up with Jeffers comes from, is the defense is not great. If the defense was better, you would have seen probably a more diminished reliance upon Christian Vazquez when he was healthy. We'll talk about Vazquez next. But I think the most concerning thing about Jeffers' defense, too, is that early in his career, we saw him be a capable, competent, solid defensive catcher. And I felt like that's slipped. I'm not saying it's due to lack of effort or anything like that, but it certainly has gone in another direction. Still, though, 15th in weighted runs created plus among catchers, tied with William Contreras. So the defense could get Jeffers into even just that 3 Fangraphs WAR range, which it's a tough spot to be for catchers. And again, we have to consider that catchers don't slash what Jeffers did. A 753 OPS from a catcher is certainly more valuable than a 753 from a first baseman. And there's layers to that. But, really would like to see the defense get back to where it was. And also, too, Jeffers is going to be a free agent at the end of next year. So it is getting to be decision time on Mr. Jeffers. It's not going to be as simple as, Eduardo Tait's going to be ready next season and just take things over, and it's a 1-to-1 swap. First of all, it's a lot more difficult than that to bring a catcher along. Second of all, that's kind of, I think, underselling what Jeffers brings to the table in terms of value. And frankly, I do think that the Twins should consider, even if it's a bridge extension with Jeffers that, eats up maybe 2 or 3 years. And again, he'd have to be amenable to that. Free agency and catchers is tricky. Every now and then you'll get a JT Realmuto in that mix who will get paid. But frankly, that doesn't happen that often. And I forgot to mention this too. 15th in catcher Fangraphs WAR, tied with Realmuto himself, who's going to be a free agent this offseason. And not that that's a perfect one-to-one comparison, but if you see what Realmuto gets this offseason, it could help shape the idea of what Jeffers could get in an extension. Now, there'd be differing levels. He doesn't hit quite like Realmuto did at Realmuto's peak. Realmuto's older, more defensively accomplished, but different paths to a similar number. And then Tyler Heineman, the other guy he was tied with, was the backup to Alejandro Kirk in Toronto. So middle of the road starting catcher is not something you can really, shake a fist at as far as value. We'll talk about too with Vazquez. Like, yeah, the numbers were pretty unsightly, but again, it's a catcher. There's a lot of things about catcher value that I think we may not adequately have analyzed through statistics. And we may never, just because of the nature of the position, the nature of what teams value. What we saw, for instance, with some Twins, and I want to say Joe Ryan was one of them, that their ERA throwing to Jeffers versus Vazquez, is markedly higher with Jeffers. Now, I don't know how particularly indicative that is of much, because the pitcher still has to execute pitches. Some guys call their own games. Things have changed in the PitchCom era, that sort of thing. And also, too, there's some noise in it. Did one guy catch when they faced the Rockies, and did the other guy catch when they faced the Yankees? There's noise in it that maybe makes it not all that it's cracked up to be. I know that catcher ERA was kind of a stat people used for a minute in this statistical revolution, until we were kind of like, if a catcher's got bad pitchers throwing to him, it's not really his fault. Now, I think comparing how a pitcher throws to separate catchers is definitely more valuable. But again, I don't know that we can really say, oh, this guy threw for a 4 ERA versus a 2.5. Do we have a reason to believe that maybe there's a preference one way or the other? We've seen Twins pitchers, Carl Pavano comes to mind, who do have a preference throwing to a specific catcher. This was Drew Butera. Scott Erickson back in the day had Junior Ortiz. I'm calling back on those old Twins games again. I watched the Twins' first ever game at Wrigley on YouTube today, so I'm having fun kind of going back to that. But so I'm not saying that I think Jeffers is that much inferior defense-wise to Vazquez to where it's a huge effect, or that we can draw those conclusions purely from the separation in ERA from, say, a Joe Ryan throwing to one or the other. But I still fall back on Jeffers. When he was drafted, as I understood, was a hitting catcher. Then he was a fielding catcher when he came up, until the bat kind of caught up, and now he's kind of flipped the script again. So I'm really hoping that he can marry those two up and really put together a nice season. This has the feelings, though, of a classic walk year season where maybe he, goes off for an 800 OPS and 20 bombs and plays most of the season. Because frankly, I feel like I'm saying frankly a lot. We don't know anything about the backup catcher situation next year. We don't know anything if Jeffers will be back. Maybe they approach a trade and have some other ideas of where to go behind the plate. But with that said, this to me feels like a classic walk year, big season from a catcher. I think it would be wise to sign Jeffers on a bridge contract, again, 2-3 years, and have him be the guy up until Taiit is ready, again, assuming that day comes. So grade for Ryan Jeffers, I gave him a straight up B. I think it's probably like a B-, and then you factor in that catchers just aren't that great offensively, and that's kind of how I got there. So We got to Jeffers here in the first segment. We'll talk Christian Vazquez, Kody Clemens, and Edouard Julien before we get out of here. But before we get out of here for the night, we do have to take a quick break. So again, we'll come back. We'll talk Christian Vazquez, see how you guys feel about him, and Mr. Clemens and Mr. Julien. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Every day we make decisions, but on Prize Picks, being right can actually get you paid. Don't miss the excitement of this football season with Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. Playing Prize Picks is such a fun, simple way to add more excitement to football. You just pick more or less on player projections like Josh Allen's passing yards, Saquon Barkley's rushing for a touchdown or not, all that sort of stuff, and you're in the game. I love how quick it is too. Less than a minute and you have a lineup. That's faster than you brew your coffee every morning. And also they just added stacks. So if I want to ride with a player, I can select their passing yards, rushing yards, and touchdowns all in one lineup, hoping that Jalen Hurts hits all of the unders this weekend against the Vikings. And it's also fun to follow other players in the app and copy their lineups with just one click. If you want to do that, I want to have my own lineup, but if you have someone else that you want to emulate because it's the sincerest form of flattery, then that's what you want to do. And the new injury reboot feature, easy for me to say, if your player leaves early and doesn't return, it doesn't count against you. And there is a special max discount promotion live on the board right now for the Golden State Warriors versus LA Lakers game on October 21st. So coming up here very soon. Steph Curry is discounted to only needing more than a half a point to win. Easiest bet in the game. Mix and match players from football, basketball, and baseball and build your dream lineup today. Download the Prize Picks app and use code LOCKDOWNMLB and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. All right, we're back here rocking with you. Segment 2, Locked On Twins. Broke down Ryan Jeffers in the first segment, gave him a B for 2025. If you disagree, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, tweets, whatever it is. One moment, please. Still battling that little bit of throat cough stuff, so I may have to mute and drop off the radar for just a second. But anyway, Ryan Jeffers is a B. If you disagree with that, I would love to hear from you. At Brand_Warne on the tweets, at Warne.bsky.social on the skeets, or YouTube, wherever you know where to get hold of me. You know that I would love to hear from you. Up next, catcher Christian Vazquez, /189, 271, 274. In 214 plate appearances, that's a 0.5 on the Baseball Reference WAR scale, 0.3 on the Fangraph scale. Christian Vazquez, I feel like we can confidently say, has not offered much offensively as a Twin. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. No, I'm not exactly saying a whole lot of anything that's going to surprise anybody. And the expectation that Vazquez would hit for the Twins like he did, in 2019 with the Red Sox would have been very, very, very foolish to run with. But Vazquez is a catcher where he's been around winning, and it's not exactly a statistical measure, but I do believe that winning and certain players kind of follow each other around. Now, Vazquez was on two Twins teams that did not win the last 2 years, so maybe that shoots a hole in that logic. But won a World Series with the Red Sox, was sought after and traded for by the Astros from the Red Sox, won a World Series with the Astros. I would bring him back as a defensive-minded backup. I still see value in that. Again, the hitting didn't even hit his weight, and that's not meant to be disrespectful. He barely slugged his weight. It just was not a good offensive season. His price is going to reflect that. Austin Hedges continually gets a 1-year, $4 million deal from the Guardians, not entirely unlike how the Yankees used to do with, I think it was Hiroki Kuroda, where they just every single year signed him to like a 1-year, $12 million deal. And it was just like a standing offer at the end of the season. Vazquez at a year and $4 million as a backup catcher is when you're going to have a young pitching staff, regardless of if you keep Joe Ryan and if you keep Pablo Lopez, regardless of if you keep those guys, you're going to have a young pitching staff. They've worked with Jeffers. They've worked with Vazquez. Continuity is big, but also just having a guy like Vazquez, who's basically Martin Maldonado at this point of his career, there's still value to that. And again, I can't prove that, but these guys get jobs because people in baseball agree with what I'm saying to you. So again, I know he didn't hit. He came back. You got to take your hat off to him coming back after that infection in his shoulder to come back and play the last 2 games of the year. Most veterans would shut it down. He wasn't going to come back to do enough to change the perception on him as a free agent. There wasn't enough time for that. But it could have only gone downhill. The injury or whatever issue he had could have flared up worse and stretched into the offseason and made him, not available to sign any sort of deal until late into the winter or anything like that. So I think him coming back the way he did showed some character as far as veteran leadership, coming back into a building with players, all different young guys, going into a situation where it would have been very, very easy to just say, peace out. My contract's over. I'm going to find another job, God willing, we'll see what happens. But I have to give Vazquez a D-. I mean, the offense was just that bad. I still think there's value in defense. I still think there's value in what he brings to pitcher-catcher meetings in the clubhouse, et cetera, so on and so forth. But the bat was just that bad. I mean, there's really no way to look at it otherwise. And if this was a good team, it would have been very easy to look the other way. The Astros did exactly that, winning a World Series with Martin Maldonado as their primary catcher with Vazquez behind him. I think Maldonado started over him most of the time. But good teams have had catchers like Mike Zunino, Austin Hedges, the Rays got by with the third Molina brother, Jose Molina, for all those years, just because he was a good defender and called a good game. So I know that, I might get torches and pitchforks saying the Twins should bring back Vazquez, but if he signs the Austin Hedges deal, 1 year, $4 million, who else are you going to give the job to? Johnny Pereda? I thought he looked pretty good. I'd bring him into camp as a third catcher, but there's also a chance he gets outrighted off the roster. There's a chance he just caught lightning in a bottle for that little stretch at the end of the year and was more offensively capable than he'd been anywhere else. But there's also a chance that maybe he figured some things out and could be a decent backup. I don't want to lose Pereda at the expense of keeping Vazquez, I don't think. But I just don't know that I could also put all my eggs in the Pereda basket as the backup catcher. And I don't know that any of the catchers from AAA, Patrick Winkle, anybody like that, I don't know that the Twins are going to want to hand over the backup job based on how they viewed backup catchers. Having one especially defensive minded, even when they had Jason Castro and Mitch Garver, it was defensive minded. You had to have one of them be defensive minded. Garver was the offensive catcher and Castro was the defensive catcher. Garver and Jeffers was more of the defensive catcher. And then, there was kind of some stuff behind the scenes where they both wanted to be the guy and just it wasn't going to be a good match. And 2 right-handed catchers that is kind of superfluous for their skill sets, just based on what they had. So nevertheless, the Twins are going to want a defensive catcher as their backup. Do they think Johnny Pereda could be that guy? I can't say for sure, but I would bring Vazquez back on a cheap deal because his value in the clubhouse will very easily be provided with whatever small amount of money it will be to bring him back. Now, does he want to come back? I have no idea. So, Vazquez D-, Jeffers a B. Question marks in this catching core because Eduardo Tait, the guy they got in the Joan Duran trade, easy for me to say, isn't going to be ready anytime soon. So, as I said in the first segment, would like to see Jeffers get a 2-year extension, tack 2 years onto this next year at a reasonable rate just to have some continuity behind the plate, because it's not often that catchers, even like Jeffers, come along. And so, yeah, I hope the Twins consider keeping him around for the medium term. We want to keep you around for the medium term and bring you back for the third segment. We do have to pause, but then when we come back, I do have breakdowns on Kody Clemens and Edouard Julien, the top two guys for first base, playing time in the departure of Ty France. So we'll take our last break, and then when we come back, we'll have a little discussion about guys who played some first base for the Twins this year. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss, because right now new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Now, I've seen put down 5, get 100, 150, 200, 250, but never, ever have I seen 300. And I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to play, whether it's a same game parlay, live action, you name it, FanDuel has got it. Makes watching football even more exciting. You're already watching the action. Why not get a little action on the action? And whether you're a casual fan or if you're a stat freak like me, diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, we are back here. Final segment, Locked On Twins. We've gone through the catchers and their 2025 grades. Recap: B for Ryan Jeffers, a D- for Kody Clemens. Before we go too far, I do want to remind you that there is still a Locked On game night every single night until the season is over. So thank you for making us, Locked On Twins, your first listen every day. But for your second, Locked On MLB game night every night until we have that World Series champion crowned. I hope it's not the Dodgers. Nothing against the Dodgers. I just want to see somebody else win. Get your local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB or wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. I want to make sure I say that correctly. All right. So we're back here for the home stretch. Kody Clemens. Here's the tale of the tape on Mr. Kody Clemens. 216, 284, 442 on the slash. 379 plate appearances. A lot like his year before. A little bit of tweaks on the average on-base slug, but more or less 95 weighted runs created plus this year, 90 the year before. A lot of that could just be tied up in the fact that Philly's a little bit better of a hitting ballpark, but came out to 1.2 baseball reference WAR, 1.4 Fangraphs WAR, 379 plate appearances, a 1.3 WAR-ish, in between the two. I mean, if you give a guy like that 500 plate appearances, you're closing in on 2 WAR. But if you give a guy like that 500 plate appearances, you're probably not a very good baseball team. And so it kind of cuts both ways. He played 58 games at first base, which was the most of any Twin outside of Ty France. But he also, this is actually was kind of fun to see, he led the team in starts at second base as well with 50. Now, Willie Castro at 42 gets traded at the deadline. That's part of it. And then Luke Keeschel obviously getting hurt in the early part of the season. He played 41. So it wasn't like Clemens ran away with it or should have been considered at any point the everyday second baseman. I lumped him in with first baseman because, without Ty France and without a lot of the guys they traded, a lot of these positions were thrown into the fire and were just completely in flux for the last 2 months of the season. I look at Clemens as a defensively competent first and second baseman and then corner outfielder. There's some value to that. Teams like to have those guys. I don't think the Phillies loved dumping him and seeing him going elsewhere and playing fairly well. Now, with that said, I don't know that he would have had a spot on that Phillies team. Clearly he didn't because they designated him and then flipped him to the Twins. But I also don't think a lot of fan bases look at when guys leave and really fret or spend too much time thinking about how they played or anything like that, especially not a guy like Clemens, who wasn't a star, hit some pretty big home runs and some pretty big hits for a guy who hit 216 on the season. Not enough OBP skills to be on a good team, but for now he stays. I think as it looks right now, he's probably your 25th man. Ryan Kreidler, your 26th. Had a full breakdown of him on Thursday's show. First segment of the Ask Brandon Anything, I just kind of broke down what I thought Kreidler brings to the table. Spoiler alert, more than a 383 OPS. So go back and check that out. But with Clemens, I mean, it's really hard to hit 216 and slug 442. So I don't want to dump on him too much. But the on base isn't there. The average isn't there. It's the kind of player who's a fun story on a team that's not very good. I don't think he's a first division utility man. I think he's a utility man on a team that wins 70 games, which is, I mean, kind of looking in a mirror right now. So with all that in mind, I gave Kody Clemens a B-. Again, there's value there. I just don't know if he's a puzzle piece that fits on a good Twins team. Not many good teams at all. I mean, he was on the Phillies last year, so there's, point in his favor. But I don't think the Twins are the team where he is going to get the most playing time, the most out of his playing time, and be the best fit on the roster. So if he has a good spring next year and somebody offers you, maybe the Twins are in a position to trade for a reliever, depending on how things go in camp. This is the kind of move I could see where it's a team looking for some thump and has a reliever that's their, odd man out, whether it's options or maybe just they have a strong bullpen and not enough infield outfield depth. So it'll just be something to keep an eye on. I don't know that Clemens is long for Minnesota. Not because of anything he did. It's kind of a weird fit on a team that's full of a bunch of young guys who play his position. So I gave him a B-. I would love to hear if you would have given him something different, because I think there's a pretty easy case to go worse than a B- just because he's hit 216. It's just, I'm not a big batting average guy, but it's really hard to be a really good player and hit 216. It just is. So if you have a lower grade, I'm not going to beat you up over it, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. Finally, Edouard Julien. Are you going to rule again? It certainly does not appear so. 220, 309, 324 slash, and 208 plate appearances. I watched virtually every game this season. By the way, that's a minus 0.8 B WAR and F WAR. B WAR is Baseball Reference WAR. Fangraphs WAR is F WAR. If you're not familiar with the terms, just some difference in how they view defense and whatnot. I like to paint a full broad picture, so I put both of them on there. I watched almost every game this year, and I was still stunned to see that he accrued 208 plate appearances in the major leagues. It doesn't feel to me like he played that much. I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing either. And we're coming up on a full season, 509 plate appearances, 158 games, where he's like an 80 weighted runs created plus. It was like 81 last year, 79 this year, or vice versa. And not quite the same number of plate appearances, but more or less 80 weighted runs created plus, no defensive value to speak of. And, the Twins, I think they'll take him off the 40 this offseason. I don't think he'll be a first wave outright. We've seen Jose De Leon was a first wave outright for the Red Sox, former Twins reliever he was pitching okay and then blew out his arm, and then the Twins didn't bring him back, and he got a look this year with the Red Sox. Anyway, that first wave where they outright the guys off, it's kind of like the obvious choices. I don't think Julien will be like that, but I think he's going to get a chance someplace else. I wrote down, hello, Denver. If the Rockies picked up Edouard Julien and had him play first or second base every single day, I feel strongly that he would put up about an 820, 830 OPS and like a 0.2 Fangraphs WAR. No defensive value, not enough offense for the environment, but enough to get people maybe a little bitter that he couldn't do it again with the Twins like he did a couple seasons ago. But I think we're far enough away from 2023 to say, yeah, if that comes back, how valuable is it even with bad defense? And you're not going to push aside a Luke Keeschel for a guy like that. So this is one I gave Julien an F. I mean, minus almost 1 WAR is, you can't really sugarcoat it. I don't want people to fret over losing Edouard Julien because he's going to go elsewhere. He's only going to be in his age 27 season. It might look good, but the Twins cannot afford that opportunity to Julien again. Not because they're going to necessarily be good next year, but they have too many players who play the same position as him who are more deserving of longer looks. So I think Edouard Julien has 1 foot out the door, and I think he's going to hit well someplace else again. I think Denver would be a place to watch, and I gave him an F. Not like I'm feeling too good about it, but at the same time, you know, you get what you put in. That's a wrap. Thank you for hanging out with me on this edition of Locked On Twins. We will be back with some middle infielders for our next edition, most likely on sometime on Saturday. We're going to be rolling through with some shows to get back up to speed here. So again, thank you so much. We'll run down the grades here just one last time. It's a B for Ryan Jeffers, a D- for Christian Vazquez, a B- for Kody Clemens, and an F for Edouard Julien. I'm Brandon Warne again saying thank you so much for hanging out, and we'll see ya.